at anything, stop asking, when will I get there? And start asking, how can I love the journey that gets me there? Because when you love the process, success isn't a destination, it becomes your lifestyle. And that's when you truly become unstoppable. It's easy to be consistent when you're motivated. It's easy to wake up early when you're excited. It's easy to give your best when you feel inspired. But what happens on the days you don't? The days when your alarm feels heavier than your dreams. The days when your energy is gone, when no one is watching, when your progress feels invisible. That's when greatness is tested. Because being the best isn't about doing your best once. It's about showing up again and again, even when you don't feel like it. Consistency is not about passion, it's about discipline. Passion gives you the spark, but discipline keeps the fire burning. Most people rate to feel ready, but the best don't rely on feelings. They rely on habits. Feelings are temporary. Habits are permanent. You might not always be in control of how motivated you feel, but you're always in control of what you do next. Let me tell you a story. There was a young writer who wanted to publish a book. Every morning he'd sit with his notebook, but some days his words wouldn't come out right. He'd stare at the blank page for hours, frustrated, questioning his talent. One day his teacher told him, "Don't judge your effort by how inspired you feel today. Judge it by whether you showed up anyway." So he did. He wrote even when he didn't feel like it. A year later, he looked back and realized the pages he wrote on his worst days were the ones that taught him the most. That's the power of consistency. It's not glamorous. It's not always exciting. But it's what separates dreamers from doers. Success doesn't come from what you do occasionally. It comes from what you do repeatedly. It's like water dripping on a stone. One drop doesn't make a difference. But over time, it can carve through rock. Some people say, "But I'm not seeing results." And I tell them, you don't go to the gym once and expect muscles. You don't meditate one day and expect peace. You don't practice 1 week and expect mastery. You keep showing up because every small effort compounds into something extraordinary. Even nature teaches us this. The sun rises every morning, not because it feels like it, but because it's consistent. The river keeps flowing, not because it's praised for doing so, but because it's its nature. In the same way, if you want to be great, make consistency your nature. The best athletes train even when tired. The best artists create even when uninspired. The best leaders serve even when unrecognized, because they understand results come after repetition. And here's a secret: consistency builds confidence. Every time you follow through on a promise to yourself, your self-belief grows. You start to trust your own word, and when you trust yourself deeply, no challenge feels too big. So when your mind says, "Not today," whisper back, "Just one more step." Because one more step each day leads to miles over time. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be persistent. The best in the world are not the most talented. They are the most consistent. They didn't climb the mountain in one leap. They took one steady step every single day. And the magic is, those steps, no matter how small, always add up. Perfection. That one word that silently kills more dreams than failure ever could. So many people don't even begin because they're waiting for the perfect moment, the perfect plan, the perfect confidence, the perfect version of themselves. But here's the truth: perfection is an illusion. It doesn't exist in nature, it doesn't exist in life, and it certainly doesn't exist in growth. What exists is progress. Slow, imperfect, sometimes messy, but always moving forward. I once met a young man who told me, I don't want to start my YouTube channel yet because I want everything to be perfect. My camera, my speech, my background, my editing. A year later, he still hadn't uploaded his first video. He had improved nothing because he hadn't even started. I smiled and told him, you're not waiting for perfection. You're hiding behind it. Because perfectionism often isn't about high standards. It's about fear. Fear of being judged, fear of failing, fear of not being enough. But progress requires courage. It asks you to take that first shaky step, even when your legs tremble. Every expert you admire today was once a beginner who looked foolish at first. The first time they spoke, their voice shook. The first time they performed, they made mistakes. The first time they tried, they doubted themselves. But they didn't stop because it wasn't perfect. They continued until it got better. They didn't chase perfection, they chased progress. And progress rewarded them with mastery. Perfection says, do it right or don't do it at all. Progress says, do it wrong, but do it anyway, because you'll learn. When you shift your focus from perfection to progress, everything changes. Suddenly, failure becomes feedback, mistakes become lessons, setbacks become setups for comebacks. You stop seeing flaws as proof that you're not good enough and start seeing them as proof that you're growing. You begin to celebrate small wins because small wins accumulated over time create big transformations. Think about how nature grows. The seed doesn't become a tree overnight. It breaks, it bends, it stretches, it survives storms, and it keeps growing silently, patiently, imperfectly. The leaves don't all grow at the same time. Some wither, some fall, some bloom again, yet somehow it becomes a magnificent tree. Why? Because nature never tries to be perfect. It just keeps evolving. The problem with chasing perfection is that it paralyzes you. You keep polishing instead of progressing. You keep editing instead of executing. You keep dreaming instead of doing. And while you're waiting to be perfect, someone else is taking imperfect action and growing through it. The world doesn't reward the one who's perfect, it rewards the one who dares to start. Progress is humble. It doesn't shout. It whispers quietly every day, keep going. You're better than you were yesterday. You may not notice the changes daily, but one day you'll look back and realize how far you've come. Every drop of effort, every small step, every failure you turned into a lesson. It all adds up. So stop trying to be perfect. Start trying to be better. Don't aim for flawless, aim for fearless. Don't aim to impress, aim to improve. Don't chase the image of perfection. Chase the reality of progress. Because the truth is, even the most perfect people you see are still growing, still learning, still failing quietly behind the scenes. When you learn to love progress, you set yourself free. You no longer fear mistakes, you welcome them. You no longer avoid feedback, you seek it. You no longer wait for the right time, you make this moment right. And that, my friends, is when life begins to open up in the most beautiful way. Because perfection might look impressive from the outside, but progress transforms you from the inside. It builds patience, resilience, humility, and strength. And the best part, you'll never run out of room to grow. You'll never stop becoming. So don't chase being perfect. Chase becoming better. Because perfection ends the moment you think you've arrived, but progress keeps you alive. There's something profoundly humbling about realizing that no matter how much you know, Someone else has already walked the road you're just beginning to step on. The people who become the best in any field, they don't just rely on their talent. They learn from those who've mastered the craft before them. They study greatness. They sit at the feet of wisdom. They listen, absorb, and grow. Because the truth is, success leaves clues, and only the humble have the patience to follow them. You see, we live in a world where everyone wants to be a teacher, but very few want to remain a student. Everyone wants to speak, but very few want to listen. Everyone wants to lead, but not enough want to learn how to follow first. But if you look closely at every legend, every master, every icon, you'll find one thing in common. They all had a teacher, a mentor, a guide who shaped their direction. Let me share something with you. There was once a young musician who played beautifully, but he always added his own flair, never following the basic scales his teacher gave him. I already know this, he would say, brushing off his mentor's advice. Years passed, and though he played fast and flashy, something was missing. One day, he listened to his old teacher perform. The notes were simple, but they touched his heart. He realized in that moment that mastery doesn't come from knowing everything. It comes from understanding the depth of what seems simple. That's the power of learning from a master. A master doesn't just give you information, they give you perspective. They don't just show you how to do something, they show you why it matters. They see the mistakes you can't see. They save you from the pitfalls they once fell into. And if you're wise enough to listen, you can compress their decades of experience into your years of effort. But learning from a master requires humility. It means admitting, I don't know. It means being willing to start over, to unlearn, to rebuild. It means surrendering your ego, that little voice that says, I already know this. Because ego is the enemy of growth. The moment you think you know everything, you stop learning. And when you stop learning, you stop improving. Some people fear learning from others because they think it makes them less original. But it's the opposite. When you learn from many sources, your uniqueness grows. You take what others teach and you make it your own. You blend wisdom with your personality, experience, and vision, and that creates authenticity. Think of every great leader, philosopher, or creator. Even they stood on the shoulders of giants. The greatest minds in history were students of those who came before them. They didn't copy. They learned, evolved, and then added their own light. Every innovation, every revolution, every transformation began with someone humble enough to say, teach me. And mentors don't always come wearing titles. Sometimes your greatest teacher is a failure that humbles you. Sometimes it's a friend who tells you a hard truth. Sometimes it's a child who teaches you simplicity. Wisdom isn't limited to age or position. It's everywhere, but only visible to those who are willing to see it. The best in any field are lifelong learners. They never stop being curious. They ask questions even when they know the answers, because they want to understand deeper. They listen more than they speak. They take notes, they reflect, they observe. They understand that learning isn't a phase of life. It is life. When you learn from a master, you don't just gain skills. You inherit a mindset. You learn patience. You learn respect for the craft. You learn the power of humility. You learn that being great isn't about being above others. It's about being open enough to grow from others. So never hesitate to seek a mentor, to ask questions, to listen deeply. Because wisdom cannot be downloaded. It must be absorbed through humility and effort. And when you combine your passion with the lessons of those who've walked before you, you accelerate your journey beyond what you could achieve alone. Remember, you can walk far by yourself, but with the guidance of a master, you can fly. Repetition, that word that makes most people sigh, roll their eyes, and say, "Not again." We live in a world addicted to novelty, constantly chasing what's new, exciting, and different. But here's the paradox. While most people keep looking for something new, the masters keep doing the same thing again and again, until they make it extraordinary. You see, greatness isn't built in moments of excitement, it's built in the quiet rhythm of repetition. Let me tell you a story. There was a young martial artist who grew impatient with his training. He told his teacher, "I want to learn something new. I've been practicing the same kick for months." The teacher looked at him calmly and said, "I fear not the man who has practiced 10,000 kicks once, but the man who has practiced one kick 10,000 times." That's the secret. Mastery doesn't come from variety, it comes from depth. When you embrace repetition, you're not just training your hands or your mind, you're shaping your character. Every time you repeat something, you're carving discipline into your soul. The first time you do it, it feels awkward. The second time, a little better. The 100th time, it becomes effortless. And by the 1,000th time, it becomes who you are. That's when excellence is no longer something you try to do. It's something you've become. But repetition isn't easy. It's boring. It's lonely. It tests your patience. It makes you question whether you're progressing at all. And that's where most people give up. Not because they lack talent, but because they lack endurance. They want quick results, instant rewards, visible progress. But the best, they fall in love with the unseen progress. They understand that mastery often hides behind monotony. Look at the world's best athletes. They don't spend every day doing something new. They practice the same drills, the same movements, the same routines, over and over again. The best musicians play the same scales, the same notes, until their fingers move with precision without thought. The best speakers rehearse their tone, their pauses, their words, not to sound robotic, but to sound natural. Repetition doesn't kill creativity, it refines it. There's something sacred about repetition. It humbles you. It teaches you patience. It teaches you to be present, because when you repeat something enough times, you begin to notice details you never saw before. You learn the tiny nuances, the subtle shifts that separate good from great. You realize that true mastery isn't found in doing more things, it's found in doing one thing deeper. The problem today is that most people quit right before repetition starts to pay off. They do something for a few days, don't see results, and move on to the next thing. They switch too soon. They keep planting seeds, but never stay long enough to see them grow. But those who endure the boredom of repetition, they are the ones who harvest excellence. Because repetition doesn't just strengthen skill, it strengthens patience, focus, and faith. Think about nature. The waves crash against the rocks not once, but endlessly. Over time, they carve through solid stone. The wind blows across the desert dunes day after day, shaping mountains of sand. The sun rises and sets with perfect regularity, painting a masterpiece in the sky every single day, and yet we never call it boring. Why? Because repetition done with purpose is beauty. In your own life, when you find yourself repeating something, studying the same lesson, practicing the same habit, showing up for the same goal, don't think of it as stagnation. Think of it as refinement. Each repetition is polishing your craft. your courage, your control. It's making you more fluid, more focused, more free. And here's something most people don't realize. Repetition builds confidence. Every time you do something repeatedly, your brain forms stronger neural pathways, your body remembers, your mind adapts. You begin to move with certainty, speak with assurance, and act with instinct. What once felt difficult becomes second nature, and that's when you step into flow, that magical state where effort feels effortless. So the next time you feel bored with the process, remind yourself boredom is the gateway to brilliance. Don't run from it, embrace it. Because if you only work when it's fun, you'll never go beyond average. But if you keep going when it's dull, when it's silent, when no one is clapping, that's when greatness is built. The masters you admire weren't born with superhuman talent. They simply learn to love what others avoid, the grind, the repetition, the practice. And in doing so, they turn the ordinary into extraordinary. So keep showing up, keep repeating, keep polishing your craft even when it feels mundane. Because one day, someone will look at your effortless excellence and call it talent. But you'll know the truth. It wasn't talent. It was repetition embraced with devotion. The most powerful conversations you'll ever have in your life are not with other people. They're with yourself. That quiet voice inside your head, the one that whispers when the world is silent, the one that speaks before you act, before you decide, before you rise or fall. That voice determines everything. Your inner voice can be your best friend or your worst enemy. It can lift you when no one else will, or it can destroy your confidence before you even begin. That's why mastering your inner dialogue is one of the greatest forms of strength. You see, every person who has ever achieved greatness didn't just control their habits, they controlled their headspace. Because life doesn't break you through events, it breaks you through interpretation. What you say to yourself about what happens to you decides how you respond. Two people can go through the same struggle. One says, "Why is this happening to me?" and gives up. The other says, "What is this teaching me?" and grows. The difference isn't the situation, it's the story they tell themselves. There's a little voice in all of us that constantly narrates our lives. When you fail, it says something. When you're afraid, it says something. When you face a challenge, it says something. The question is, whose voice is it? Is it the voice of your fears, your past failures, your critics? Or is it the voice of faith, of growth, of self-belief? Because if you don't learn to manage that inner voice, it will manage you. Let me tell you a story. There was a runner preparing for a marathon. During training, every time he reached the halfway point, his mind started whispering, "You're tired, you can't go further, you should stop." One day, his coach told him, "The voice in your head will always speak before your body gives up. Learn to talk back." The next time when that voice said, "You can't," he replied, "Watch me." And he finished his best run ever. That's what it means to control your inner voice, to replace doubt with direction. Our brains are wired to protect us from pain, and that's why the inner voice often sounds fearful. It's not evil, it's protective. It says, "Don't try, you might fail," because it wants to shield you from disappointment. But if you keep obeying that voice, you live safely and small. Growth demands that you reprogram your self-talk. Every time your mind says, "I can't," whisper back, "I'll learn how." Every time it says, "I'm not ready," tell it, "I'll never be, but I'll start anyway." The best people in the world have trained their inner voice to become their coach, not their critic. They use self-talk to stay steady under pressure, to stay calm under chaos, to stay focused under failure. When the world tells them no, their inner voice tells them go. When life says stop, their soul says not yet. That's the quiet rebellion of greatness, the refusal to let your own thoughts become your prison. Controlling your inner voice doesn't mean ignoring negativity.